longer about how to really dig into the art of that and the fun of that, making sure the bees are healthy in the process also. But if anyone, I see the Wilsons are not here today, if anyone could take those, or if he's already talked to you about constructing those, if you have a wood shop or something, you might want to take some of those handouts with you, and I can work with you on that also. So, welcome. I also have a land acknowledgement for the area that I would just like to gracefully acknowledge and honor and thank the Native peoples in the Kalispel and the Coeur d'Alene tribes, because today we're going to be talking about things in their native lands and their ancestral homelands. And I recognize these diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. And we're also going to be talking about these native ecosystems. So I believe it's a great honor to involve everyone and speak about everyone and these insects that are really running things in our gardens, right? We're going to talk a little bit about some of the native bees in our area so that we can be better informed about what's out there. Why do we care about these native bees, right? And a way to plant areas that is called a plant community. And how would that look here in Northern Idaho? How would you go about beginning to develop something like that? It is a long process, but I'm going to give you a few tools if you feel inspired to add some things to a planting in your yard or create a new space in this style. You'll have some tools today to get you on the right track and start developing your goals. So we are going to be centered around talking about native bees specifically for our native pollinators. And most of us in our head have this idea of a bee, right? When you say a bee, it's generally the rock star honeybee, right? We're all used to seeing it. All the stuffed animals look like it. All of everything we've grown up in life usually has a honeybee on it when we hear a bee. Bumblebees, they're catching up quickly in all those visuals and learning. But this is an interesting piece of information here. In New York State, 1,200 people were surveyed about how many species of bees there might be in the United States. Their answers were hovered around 50. In actuality, the species number is around 4,000 for the United States. We're off. So they were also asked, could you identify common bees in North America? Some of the most common bees on the left there, most people could identify. Many could not identify that they were common bees. Most people, not all, might I say, the grouping of the three insects on the right could identify those were not bees. Some people were unsure. Oops. Many thought this velvet tree ant was a bee. So the reason why I like to talk about this as everyone who polled said it is important to help bees, right? But we don't really know what the bees are or who they are or who's in our garden. So there, to me, is that enough? I personally do not think so. That creates quite a disconnect. Each of these species of bees has a story to tell. If we don't know that story, how can we help? If we don't know their unique things or unique needs, how do we get to help or save them? Another disconnect then is created by let's save the bees. A lot of communication out there. Save the bees, save humanity. Number one, humanity is not going anywhere if we do not save the bees, okay? It is a concerning situation. Humanity is not dying if all bees go away. Okay, so let's get correct information out there. The second thing is that's not a bee, it's a wasp. Oh, just kills me. And that is the Natural Resource Defense Council. I'm sorry if you designed that poster, I'm calling you out. T-shirts are adorable and we can spread the word. That's not a bee, it's a cicada. So I am all for helping out, but let's make sure our energy and our efforts and our excitement goes to the right places. Otherwise, it's quite misguided, right? So each of these bees has a story to tell. Squash bees. Squash bees are the major bee found in Western United States. That they are the only pollinators of our squash, right? And some cucurbits. Now they are entirely dependent on squash, pumpkins, and a couple native plants that are in that plant family also. That's it. They're going to nest in the soil next to your plants, especially on farms. If we don't know where they nest, then we can't make choices about what goes on our soil, manures, amendments. A lot of people like to side dress those plants. That's where those bees are. Tilling along crops, certainly soil pesticides. So that's a unique story about that bee, that if we didn't know it, we couldn't make those informed choices, right, to help them. Bumblebees, some of everybody's favorites, right? On that top picture. Bumblebees detach their wings and vibrate their flight muscles. They're basically shivering to keep their nest at 30 degrees centigrade. That's a trivia question that somebody's going to win something out of someday. They flap their wings to cool it down if they need to. You know, that could be something unique that might help us in all of these leaves that are out there right now that I just cringe as everyone, you know, we didn't get a chance to clean up our leaves last fall when most of them didn't fall off the trees. And now everyone's out there raking those leaves, and we'll talk about this. Leave the leaves right now. They need that for temperature regulation. The females are out flying around trying to find their next burrow or cavity for their brood to come for the summer. Polyptidatus sweat bee is nocturnal. It flies at night. So everything you see on a pesticide label, whether it's organic or synthetic, says spray at night when the bees are back in their hives or in their homes or in their nests. Well, not everybody. So these are the unique things that I'm going to help inspire you today, because each of these bees has a story to tell. And if we don't know the story, how do we get to save them? How do we get to help them? I know, right? I think this genus is one of my favorites. Perdita fairy bees. Some of them are as small as Lincoln's nose on the quarter. So for everyone to reference, we generally categorize native bees. Do you have a backup? It looks like the battery, or no, it just went on. Yep, battery's out. Yeah, but the little battery's empty on the, so it's going to go out again. The little battery symbol is empty.
What size?
Pause here. Now I got y'all inspired and we put on the brakes. Double A. Pause and contemplate for a moment. No. And we're back. Battery issue handled. Okay, so as we're learning about these native bees a little bit today, most native bees, around 70%, will nest in the ground. That's a lot. Out of those 4,000 bees in the United States, we believe there's around 4,000 species, many more than individual bees in the United States. We believe 600 of those species are right here in Northern Idaho. That's a lot of ground nesting bees we're not paying attention to, or we don't even know are there, or we're not even slowing down enough in our gardens because we're so busy with our little to-do list, right? Myself included. 70% nest in the ground. We consider around 30% to be nesting in cavities. So that would be something pre-made, like mason bees that'll go into nesting material or linear cavities or twigs. Leaf cutters also are in that group, as well as, now some of you might be from areas of the United States where there are carpenter bees that mine out your deck, mine out your furniture on your deck. We don't have those bees here. You do not have to worry about them. We have small cavity nesting carpenter bees that nest in your brambles, and they eat aphids. We're going to learn about those in a minute because we really want those around. Only about 1% of native bees nest in like rodent holes or some sort of cavity in the ground. So one way we can help plant more native plants and more native patterns in how plants grow is called a plant community. Has anybody heard about a plant community before? Cool, awesome. So when I say plant community, it might spark the idea of that picture on the left is Pine Street Woods. You walk out of Pine Street Woods, that is a plant community growing there. You notice it generally is mostly stable. It has been growing there for a long time. It doesn't have a large dependency on us. And we can mimic that style of planting in how we plant, working with layers in how we plant, working with the diversity of native plants and grasses that we use. And it's something that basically can stand the test of time, regardless of temperature, climate change, soil changes, things like that. It will adapt and it will change, just like fire disturbance. That's going to be a new community that comes up for those first few years. And then that plant community changes over time. It's something that really in a lot of us is supposed to evoke this nostalgia of planting, right? It's very different from ecological restoration. It is something that's a look and it's also a feel. So it's aesthetic and it's emotional for us. The picture of those pruned meatball shrubs there are not really what inspires a plant community, right? When you look at those plant meatballs, they're not spirited, they're not spontaneous, they don't remind you of going out and sleeping under the stars. So that is the opposite of what we're talking about here. I could go sleep in that, right? A plant community, they're working together. They are intensely planted because their root systems allow for that. So we're very selective in what type of plants we use and how we repeat that, because some are very, very deep rooted. And if something is shallow rooted next to deep rooted, they can be right up next to each other. They're going to control each other's size. So it's really describing a group of plants in a place, in these overlapping populations that are very stable, because as the habitat is mostly stable as well. That's another plant community. So I went in and put some slides about establishing your goals. I am going to briefly go through these. I will make this available for you, this PowerPoint available for you. So don't feel like you have to write everything down if you want. I really just kind of want things to soak in. But I see I have 15 minutes left. So the first thing you're going to do, if this is inspiring to you, you're going to establish your goals. Because when I say plant selection and goals, I don't mean which plants are you going to go buy tomorrow, because you want to spend a long time on these goals, right? You're going to think about in your plant selection, which plants survive similar environmental conditions, They're compatible in competitive strategy with each other. And it's more about how it performs in that kind of ecology of everything growing. It's not necessarily as strict. Of course, you could make it if that's your goal. These are native plants from this area, and that is all I'm including. It's not necessarily just about ecological region, right? Our weather's changing here. Our soil temperature, our soil moisture levels are changing. You might have to look outside a little bit of this area when you start some of these new plant communities to make sure it's in it for the long haul and it's not too much maintenance, right? It's more about the planting as a whole rather than isolated individuals of plants, which means when you do buy your plants, you get to buy a lot of them, not just like go to the nursery and buy one. You want stress in these sites because that's what's going to help constrain plants, right? If we go out and we weed all that competition away from these, now we are going to do some selective weeding, right? We don't want invasives in, we don't want certain things in. But if we go out and baby these plants and give them all the water they want with a drip system and the perfect soil as we're planting and all these nutrients, which they're not going to like much anyway, they don't have a lot of competition, right? We're doing all this work for them. And a lot of you as people who have native plants in their yards, you understand that already. It's more about a higher number of plants in a more strict palette that you'd be working with than some of us might be used to. And it's very orderly, right? You have framework, you have this walkway here and this wall. That doesn't look like a weedy patch down the street in an abandoned lot when you have some framework. So maybe think about in your goals, do I want a wall? Do I want a fence? Do I want some benches? Do I want something to kind of frame that? Maybe it's a mow strip around a little meadow. That can tend to help the visual look of it become less like my neighbor's yard not my neighbor, but I'm just saying in general, my neighbor's yard that doesn't weed anything and all the weeds, noxious weeds grow and they don't do anything, to something that might be not as tidy as some gardeners like, but as a community as a whole and tied together by framework. Some bare soil, because as you just learned, 60% or 60 to 70% of native bees nest in the soil. You want some bare soil, but weeds are going to grow there, but you're not watering it, so they're not going to grow as much there. And the ground cover layer is the most important layer. It is something more that fills in. It's not there to take everything over, but it's going to help you with that weed abatement and the issues that sometimes soil can bring up when it is bare. We're also going to establish goals around management. This isn't maintenance, because we're not taking one plant at a time and pruning one plant, pruning the next plant, pruning the next. We're looking at it as a whole and managing the entire area. That might look like, if it's a wildflower meadow, it's mowed twice a year. That's your plant management. You may also go out and find an invasive plant that you need to pull out. That's a little management, but we're not going to each perennial and managing it as one. We're managing the whole area in large scale. It could look like I said, selective removing, or even in large swath areas, burning twice a year or once a year to mimic what those plants really want, to have that constraint to them. Some of you may find your goals are something aesthetic, so you want a high number of flowering species. Some may decide this is more of a functional place, so there we need a more dense ground cover layer to handle weeds. Some of you may find that this is a visible space on the corner of two busy streets in a neighborhood, so you might need a little more intervention in yours to keep the public and neighbors motivated as to what you're doing, because it's so visible. So your goal might include a little more work than, you know, an area of a land trust that we're reclaiming or something like that. You're then going to relate those plants that you will eventually select into kind of an archetype or your final goal step. Do you have the soil and the area that would support a grassland design, a woodland design, a shrubland, or a forest? And sometimes those cross over or they meet or overlap a little bit. And in this design, your edges are really important too, right? To create that authenticity. You're gonna select plants that relate to that. And I'm gonna show you a book that if this really inspires you, this is how you walk through it. And these goals are your initial steps in that. They will fill in on the rest. And then once you establish your goals that we kind of walked through today, that's when you really research your selection of plants. And what this shows is on the left are kind of a design of planting styles outside of plant communities. You know, you plant things in swaths, these little wave shapes. A plant community is more of, we have our ground cover, we have our structural plants, and we fill in with others as necessary. Why would we want to do this? Well, it's just one way to continue to have native plants in our landscape that still follow what's happening with our soils and our changing climate and things here and having that wild look to it, but don't necessarily, you know, we can't always replicate historical gardens or historical flower beds here with what's changing. And you can do this in a simple way or a complex way. We all in this room know about planting flowers for native plants, or I mean, planting flowers for native pollinators, excuse me. But I'm going to talk about some other ways that we can either through plant communities or with the gardens and the designs in your landscapes that you already have, how do we increase the native insect population in that area? So we're going to talk about what do we do with our stems, our leaves, our logs, brush piles, rock piles, and soil, and how do we continue to add that diversity to our plantings? So I have linked on my resources here this full publication that I'll show you in this section and the next section I'll bring up. It is a bookmark that you can certainly go on and print off for yourself or print off and laminate if you choose. It is a nice reference of what do I do with my plants out there when I'm doing my cleanup of my native plants, shrubs, and trees to support more pollinators. I'm going to circulate a couple things that will show you why are we talking about this. If any of these little cocoons fall out, that's fine. There's no bees in them. I have more. It's okay. You don't have to search on the floor for like tiny little. But why are we talking about this? I'm going to circulate one of those and one of these you can hold flat. These are leafcutter bees and how they nest in the pith of stems, and also a bundle of stems that we will be talking about that would mimic how you would trim in your landscape. So down and dirty, how the life cycle of native bees works. Most native bees have one generation per year. We will really dig into this next month, but quickly, one generation per year. They will use whatever they are nesting in, whatever usually vertical, horizontal, linear space. So what we're doing with this diagram is creating linear space for them to nest in, because some have hatched already and some over the next spring and summer months. Native bees will hatch out of their cocoons, whatever those cocoons are made of. They will, the males and females will mate. The females then become their own queen, doing all of the work for the young and provisioning the nest. They will choose a nest site such as your pithy plant stems, shrubs, tree stems, or material you choose to put out in a healthy way. They will provision their nest in cell structures. So what you can see here is if you were to take those twigs and turn them vertical, this is what you would see. On that, for those on Zoom, in the middle of the slide what you see with all those little yellow and green colors is at the back of a linear stem, there is a bee bread, just like honeybees do. They collect pollen and nectar. They collect it together. They'll lay an egg on that little yellow structure. And then the green is something they have used to provision their nest. Masons use mud, soil pebbles. Leaf cutters use leaves or petals. And I can go through some of the other materials at the end too, if anybody has questions about those. Plant fibers, hairs, resin, all sorts of things. Cellophane that they create from their mandibles in some species. So it goes food source, egg, wall, food source, egg, wall, food source, egg, wall, which is kind of what you can see in those leaf structures moving around. So if we can give them linear space from our plants, why not, right? How you'd want to do that is the females are coming in anywhere from now until midsummer and filling these linear spaces. So if you haven't pruned yet, that's great. If you have, start again in the fall. Start this process in the fall. So at the top there, what's happening now, let's say you have not pruned, you have some things intact, seed heads on there. You would go out in the spring when you are ready to cut things back and you want to leave stems of pithy plants. So Monarda, Echinacea, most of the native plants have pithy stems, elderberry. You can see some of those twigs, just go out and cut the seed head off and see what it looks like. If it's pithy, it could be used. Cut those down to anywhere from a varying, some at 8 inches, some at 10, all the way up to 24. That will be the nesting site for spring, summer, and all the way until next spring or summer. Leave them there. They decompose. You don't have to go back out later and cut them down. They decompose. So then in summer, you can see there, and I'll show you what this looks like in person. Some of the brown stems, the green has come up, it's flowering. Then in fall, the bees go into a hibernation through fall and winter. Most of us with native plants are leaving that anyway through the winter. That's food for birds, that's good carbon stubble that's going there. It's fine. And most of that next year, it's going to fall off and go on the ground and become great resources for our plants and other insects. Yes. Yeah, I do. Yeah. If you are a tidy gardener and you don't want to see them right by your plants, find an area and put them there. So on the left there, we're going to save those stems. That is a Echinacea, I believe. I do this in the top image. On the bottom one, those are my brambles with a little fairy bee in there.
Well, they utilize the stems that's actually still.
Yes, yes. You do not want, some of those bundles going around have an open back to what they would nest in. I don't leave it open. Oh, that's my timer. I'm going to keep talking a little bit if that's okay with everybody. You give it a back, a solid back. So leaving it in the plant is great because the female knows those bees are, then her babies are unprotected from both sides. So a lot of times people will cut those stems, tie them up like you see there and stick them in a tree. That's great, but put some cardboard, sometimes I double side black duct tape and put that at the back of it, or gaffer's tape is really strong through the weather because she needs a back on there. She won't go into any of those stems.
So the stems laying on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Those would be next year. You're going to leave your stems vertical like this. I see some of you are like, not my garden.
Yeah, I understand that.
And that's okay. Yes.
Oh, if they have the seed head on it.
Right, right. So right now, if you have not gotten to clean up your garden yet, you would leave the stalk, pop off the seed head, leave it as is. Vary those 8 to 24 inches. Like my raspberries, I don't cut all the way to the ground because this is an aphid eating bee, and I want as many of them in my garden as I can. So I have some of my brambles that I've cut back, whether they are spring or fall producing, because I'm an insect nerd, so I care more about these than all the raspberries. Blueberries are another story. But I don't mind having plant stalks around in my garden because that's what I do. And you're going to decide maybe it's only a few plants, or maybe it's one in your collection of plants. That's great. So this kind of walks you through what you're going to do for perennials, shrubs. If you have leaves out in your garden or lawn and they are not, an inch or more thick, leave them out there, or rake them up into a corner of your yard if you don't want to see them, and put them there. That's habitat for a lot of our native moths, caterpillars, or native moths, butterflies, and of course bumblebees. If you are going to move those leaves around, I know some of us like to run them over with our lawnmower. I don't suggest that this year because we have such an interesting dynamic with leaves that stayed on the trees and fell down later in the season. There's bumblebees out there, female queen overwintered bumblebees out there in those leaf piles. So I don't suggest shredding them, just move them if you need to this season. When you're out in your garden, look down, think about the soil, think about, fungicides, soil applications, anything, regardless of organic or synthetic, they're still designed to kill something, right? Bees come in contact, especially our native bees, all those ground nesters, even if they don't nest in the ground, if they're using moisture from a puddle or a damp area in your yard and they provision their nest with mud, they're rolling that bee around or that soil around in their mandibles. They're coming in contact with a lot of that soil. So think about those soil applications as well as we move into the season. These are both images of plant communities. One in an HOA managed area. Wouldn't it be cool if all entrances into those HOAs look like that? And that's where all the bus stops are, where the kids are waiting for the bus and they get to look at all the cool things happening there. HOA, some of the managed home development areas that have very strict ideas about what you can and cannot do. This is Benjamin Voigt's yard, who is kind of leading the plant community areas in HOA movement. So they're going to let him have his, and it looks very nice for most things. Okay. Some resources for you. For those at home, I will get you this PDF that have those active links as well. How do you learn more about this or other things you want to plant? If you're down in Kootenai County around Coeur d'Alene, we have a demonstration garden called the Pollination Project there. You can visit that for ideas about planting. Let's see if this will go there. Sometimes Zoom doesn't want to. This second one, the bookmark, is that Save the Stems brochure that you can look at further. A couple of you I know visit our University of Idaho website. We'll show you that since Zoom does not want me to click on those links afterwards. If you go to the University of Idaho Extension Kootenai, you go to our garden page, all the way down in the bottom, we have about 90 different handouts for you, all in different categories. Gardening with kids, fruit trees, vegetables, native plants, anything that you would like a quick reference on, you can visit that. Another reference, if you don't know it about, that's kind of fun to explore, is this National Wildlife Fund with Doug Tallamy has put together this plant finder. You'll click on this link, you'll plug in your zip code. The next thing you see is all of the native plants that are listed for that area. And you see that little 43 and then a butterfly. If you click on that goldenrod and that 43 where the butterfly is, it will then open up a page and show you all the butterflies associated with that plant or some of the other native pollinators. Pretty cool. And then it tells you the strict species that you might be looking for in your area. Of course, as native plant growers, research those make sure they fit into your goals before just plunking them in to any area. Many of you already know, and I'm sure could update me on some other native plant nurseries and seed suppliers for the area. Those resources will be available to you in this list. I like this group. I mean, I like all groups, but especially like Plant Nerds Unite, right? We really like resources, like down and dirty scientific resources on which native plants to put in the area. This one I put a red star next to is an NRCS plant database. That is where all plant nerds should go to check out. Like if you really want some strict, or we use this for a native plant or a wildflower bee mix. We use some of the species in here in a specialized bee mix that we have available. Go to that one with the red star. So all of these, as you have time, all of the wonderful photographs about the bees that look like they've been through a spa, that have their hair all puffed out and the black background, those come from the USGS Bee Lab. Here I gave you that link. And if you want to learn more about plant communities, that link at the bottom is to Thomas Rainier's book here, which you're welcome to look through, or see if the library has, or you can visit some of the information it has in it online. And I did it, and I will pass around the samples I couldn't get to because I was racing through this. I'm sorry for those at home that can't see some of these. The first thing I'll pass around are mason bees. These are one of our local bees here. This is their cocoons they have crawled out of and chewed themselves out of. Those are the actual bees themselves from last year who donated their bodies to science. And I have some other samples of some native bees here that I have not pinned yet. These are leaf cutters, cocoons, and bees. And you can come and look at those and some other of my favorite books in this topic in the back. Thank you so much. I can't believe I did that in that short amount of time, but I'm glad I get to come back next month and dig into the most common, we'll dig into the most common bees in the native species that you might see in your gardens, what they are doing in your gardens, and then how to keep native bees in your own property in ways that keep them healthy. Thank you.
Take some questions
Sure,
now. I'm
yeah,
sure
yeah,
there's going to be
questions? Are
some
there-
questions. And just repeat them for the
Yes,
Zoom
absolutely.
folks.
And if there are any questions in the from Zoom at home, you can type those into the chat box. Yes.
Do you have a copy of our landscaping with native plants in the Idaho Panhandle?
Yes.
Okay.
The question was, do I have a copy of your book? Yes, it is one of the most used books in our plant clinic for our master gardeners. I can tell you that. It's in there. Go to here first before you go to the big library around the back. Yes, we love that book. We promote that book. I knew it would be here always, so I didn't bring it as one of my favorites
Well, I didn't see
anyway.
it on your slide.
I know, I need to put it on there. I
Thank
think
you.
it's on my long
Okay.
3-hour talk about native bees, but I need to add that. Thank you. I'm gonna write that down. Yes, did you have a question also?
Fairy bee, is it smaller than the sweat bee? The
Smaller-
sweat bee are the ones that bite
Yes.
you when you bend your arm.
The question was, are fairy bees smaller than sweat bees? Yes, most species.
Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
yes, most fairy bees are smaller
Okay.
than sweat bees.
Thank you.
And the sweat bees are the ones that some of the species will land on you if you're hiking or something, and they want the minerals and the salt off your skin when you're sweating. And it's kind of really cool to be licked by a bee. I might say all of these native bees are friendly, docile. They do not have a lot to defend, like honeybees. The males do not have the anatomy to sting. And females, I've been beekeeping and working with these bees and holding them in my hands after they hatch for 8 or 9 years, and I've never been stung. My son has been doing it since he was 3, and he likes to only hold the males because he knows there's no chance to get stung. And some of them have a different pattern, and you can tell that it's a male versus a female. So get friendly with these bees. Go sit out there and watch them. Yes.
Do yellow jackets pollinate?
The question, and I get this every talk I give, do yellow jackets pollinate? Like, what is their worth here, right? Right? They pollinate because sometimes they occur on a flower waiting for their next meal, and they'll hop to another flower and wait for their meal. So there might occasionally be pollen on there, but they are not actively seeking pollen and nectar. They are, however, amazing predators in our garden. And if they weren't there, you inherit the work of then dealing with the pests that they are eating. So
What do they eat?
anything. I've seen them,
Chicken.
yeah, right? Chicken, a cat. Yes. Yes, the question was, what are the yellow jackets eating? Any insect that they can get, because that's their predators, that's their food source. Yes, and that's fine. As long as you use the pheromone that comes with those traps, you will not attract beneficial insects and native bees. You might see some ladybugs in there because they're attracted to the yellow color of the container. If you use your own mixture of things, meat will not attract native insects. Although I guess I can't say some native, there's beneficial wasps out there, much more than these unhelpful ones that sting us. So I would be careful using meat because they are also insect eaters, and that could attract them. Please don't use any like jellies, jams, sugar water, honey, something in those traps, because that will certainly attract beneficial insects. So those pheromones are specific for them. Yep. Yes.
So how about non-bee pollinators? Usually don't hear about them.
Yes, that is a whole 4 talks in and of itself also. What would you like to know about the non-bee pollinators? Do you want another talk on them? Okay. Okay. I got stuck on bees because I started learning about them and keeping them. I was like, oh, this is fun. One day, a friend of mine a while ago said, I have way too many bee cocoons. Do you want to come over and drink a glass of wine and divide them with me? And I was like, I have no idea what you just said, but I am there. And now I'm slowly, I really love lifelong learning. And I think a lot of us are so good at so many things. Why not keep learning? So I have started working through an entomology degree with Colorado State University, but I am stuck on the native bees now. So I can get you good information. And yeah, let's do another talk about the others. Yes. Yes.
Do you use iNaturalist to make observations?
I do. iNaturalist is the only one I recommend. There are many. The question was, do I use iNaturalist on my phone as an app to ID plants, insects, other animals? That is the only one that we recommend. We did a little, non-scientific trial between our master gardener group, about 50 people, and in Kootenai, and it was quite amusing what some of the others came up with when trying, or Google Lens, that's another one. It comes up with the craziest things that are so wrong. And everyone's like, oh, great, I got it. I know what it is. I'm like, oh, that's not what it is, but I love iNaturalist. That is a great way.
So if you look on the iNaturalist platform, there aren't really that many insects.
Yeah.
And it's because they're hard to observe.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for how to take good images? I mean, like with the bumblebee count, you can
Right.
capture them,
Right.
and
Yes.
take pictures. With these other bees, is that also recommended?
A lot of times when we're trying to, I can say Idaho is pretty far behind in money available to create something like that. Oregon State University has funding from legislature and and laws that allow them to do that and spend money on that. Referencing, I say that because Oregon State University's Bee Lab and all of their pollinator resources are a great reference to go from in a framework of how to do this. Taking pictures. The Xerces Society has Bumblebee Atlas. And the Bumblebee Atlas, which is surveying how many bumblebees are in an area in a grid, how they're doing. We do that for a summer camp for kids in Kootenai. They're with the program and we survey bumblebees. I survey them up on Schweitzer Mountain and Pinisku Land Trust, Pine Street, and our property next to that. And they have some great resources on certain cameras. You know, I find even a handheld, I still use a handheld camera that has a macro setting on it, which is almost like a microscope setting. And it allows you to get really close pictures. I carry that. Sometimes I'll use my phone, but as long as you know those settings on that macro, I find that to be beneficial. And you could capture any native bee out there, and just like the Bumblebee Atlas, you put them on ice, meaning they're in their own container, they're not touching ice. Give them about 5, 8, 10 minutes in there, depending on how warm it is outside. That will slow them down, help them be still. If you're photographing them for taxonomy or identification purposes, you always want their cheek, mandible, face, because that cheek size is specific in identifying species. It's hard to get them identified. You know, even some of these bees here, it costs us $30 a bee to get identified. And so, yeah, it's definitely a team coming up with something like that. But I hope that gives you some references to go on. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes. I mean, I see lots of little bees, and I just assume that they're all native. Are there any small bees that are not in this area?
For the most part, what you're going to be seeing is either native or naturalized. And it's been here so long, it's considered native. Yes, yes. The non-native bees are going to be European honeybee. In this area, I don't believe there's any introduced bumblebee species. But if it's a bee, it is all going to be native. There aren't even, you know, any, I was trying to think of any of the insects that are introduced that are not native for any of our noxious weeds. And there's nothing in any of those species. Those are all, you know, weevils, beetles, moths. So most, yeah, it's surprising if you sit down and you take a look at what's actually out there. You know, we refer to these places as our gardens, our yards. We can think we're the ones in charge of them, but we, you know, as the title that I took from Xerces Society says, little things that run the world, because these are not our spaces. We get to manage them and help out, but there's a lot going on down there with all those little creatures that absolutely, yes.
Carl?
Yes.
Someone on Zoom mentioned that they use their video on their cell phone and then choose the best frames.
Oh, that's a great idea. They use the video on their cell phone to take a video of insects, and then on many cell phones you can pause that moving picture and take images from that too. That's a great idea.
And then there was one question on Zoom about clarifying a little bit about your spring cleanup and pruning, because the person said that they do that already. They do the spring cleanup, but maybe there was a little confusion about that.
It would certainly depend on which plants we're talking about, but in general, if you have already done your spring cleanup, meaning you have taken all plant stubble down to the ground and removed it from your site and raked all your leaves, what you will do is start again next year. And in the fall, you would leave what you can or choose to, you know, choose just one little section of something if it's not as tidy for you, you know, and maybe revisit your goals. What's your goals? Not everybody has to do this, but if it inspires you to have more insects, in native populations in your yard. Choose some plants to leave as they are through the growing season, the fall, the winter. And then I would say this month or last month, go and trim either the, depending on how tall the plants are, the seed head off or halfway down, leave a variance of 8 to 24 inches in those and leave them be. Don't touch them again. They will either next year decompose, tip over, the snow will knock them down, or you could remove them 1 year, 3-4 months, I'd add later. Some of these, depends on this life cycle. Some of these bees are spring bees and they start hatching now, so they'll be adults now. Some of them are summer bees, so they will be adults and hatch in the summer. And there aren't any in the fall because they need to be almost halfway through metamorphosis before winter comes. So it would be almost a year plus 4 or 5 months or the next year that you would worry about that stubble. I hope that answers your question. Check out that reference that you will see. I will get it to Preston and he could maybe email it out to everybody, the PowerPoint and those reference pages.
There was another question. It's a little off topic, but is there an introduced ladybug? Introduced ladybug in this region?
Yes. And it's been here quite a while. Yes, if you go on to, who has the best reference for that with some great photos? Xerces is on the reference list also. That's XERCES. Society will have some references, and probably Utah State and Oregon State. So if you Google those places and then go into their gardening, horticulture department or extension, you could find some references on those, what to do about them. But yes.
Are they approximately the color of your jacket?
Yes, they're a little more like
Yeah.
ruddy
Yeah.
red, rusty, ruddy red color, sometimes a little yellow, orange.
And a second question, can we bring a bottle of wine and divide your bees?
Yeah, the wine is not even a necessary element anymore. It's just so fun. Yes, in fact, you know what? I can bring some. If I can bring some next month that you could even practice and like break open if I can hold them over enough in the fridge. Just like bears when they hibernate, they're processing and metabolizing their fat storage and their calories over the winter season. And so sometimes they will just say, I'm done and I got to hatch and I got to find resources. What I do is tailor that to when things are blooming. Of course, the native ones that are out there in something like a plant community, they're going to manage themselves. They're fine. But if I don't get the blueberries I want off my 15 plants, it's because I didn't do something right when I release them. So hopefully I will have some May 15th. It's going to depend, but I'll bring some, and yes, you can open as many as your heart desires. Yes.
You set up a sheet and a black line
Okay.
to attract, you'll probably more likely to attract a lot of moths. Would you attract nocturnal species as well?
Oh, the question is, if you set up a black light and a dark sheet or a light sheet, how would you attract nocturnal bees? I don't think we know that information yet. We're just learning, like native bees, they have different eyes, but the 3 little dots on the top of their head that you'll see, those are almost like GPS units based on the sun. And they're using them when they're hovering in front of their nesting holes to reference themselves to which hole. Oh yeah, that's my. Oh yeah, that one's mine. Based on the position of the sun and the location with those 3 eyes. I would imagine the nocturnal bees have evolved in a way that theirs do that with the moon. So I don't know if light would play into that because they'd have to get really good at narrowing out that light because of all the street lights and how they've had to adapt to things at night. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I know we survey moths that way. to attract them, but I don't know about the bees. You know, there's so much we don't know about these native insects that we're still learning, that maybe that's your next research project now that you're retired.
Next return.
Right. Okay.
Okay, I think we'll
Thank
probably
you.
hold any, if anybody would like to talk to Cara a little bit more, she's going to be here for a little bit longer. Then I'm going to be taking her to lunch. And if there's 6 people that would like to join us for a no-host lunch at Trinity, come up and let me know so that we don't have too big a crowd. You're welcome. And I have seeds from Shoei milkweed here. If anybody wants Asclepias speciosa,
Perfect.
there's some seeds, you know.
Have they been refrigerated all?
They've been in a chilled garage, yeah.
And you said your name was Anne or Anna?
Anna.
I have wildflower seeds. I'm happy to, they're specific for this area for our native bees. I'm happy to donate, and I have some other seeds from our office.